Electronic Arts is about to become a privately owned company. EA is being purchased for approximately $55 billion by an investment group dominated by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. And when I say dominated, I really do mean dominated. The Saudi PIF is expected to own roughly 93.4% of EA, with private equity company Silver Lake controlling around 5.5% and Jared Kushner's affinity partners holding the remaining 1.1%. So while this is technically a consortium, let's not dance around the reality here. Saudi Arabia is effectively buying Electronic Arts, means one of the largest publishers in gaming, owner of EA Sports FC, Madden, Battlefield, The Sims, BioWare, Respawn, Need for Speed, and countless other recognizable properties, is about to be controlled by a sovereign wealth fund. This is not just another publisher acquisition, it is a collision between gaming, private equity, geopolitics, sports, entertainment, and one of the largest economic transformation projects in the world. And depending on how this plays out, it could either give EA the freedom to think beyond quarterly financial results, or place even more financial pressure on a company that is already infamous for monetization, layoffs, and aggressive cost-cutting. EA originally announced the agreement in September 2025. The company agreed to be acquired for $55 billion, with shareholders receiving $210 per share in cash. That represented a roughly 25% premium over EA's unaffected share price. The deal was approved by EA's shareholders in December 2025 and has now cleared its remaining regulatory hurdles. At the time of writing, the transaction is expected to officially close on around the 4th of August 2026, after which EA will be taken off the public stock market. EA will no longer be a publicly traded company, constantly reporting to thousands of ordinary shareholders. Instead, it will answer primarily to a very small group of extraordinarily powerful owners. EA's current CEO, Andrew Wilson, is expected to remain in charge, so this probably will not result in an overnight transformation where every executive disappears and the entire company is rebuilt from scratch. EA will still look like EA. The logo will remain the same. EA Sports FC will still release every year. Ultimate Team will almost certainly continue making absurd amounts of money, but behind the scenes, the company's incentives could change dramatically. Saudi Arabia buying EA makes far more sense when you stop looking at it as an isolated gaming acquisition. For years, the country has been attempting to diversify its economy away from its historic dependence on oil. Gaming, esports, tourism, entertainment, and professional sport have become major parts of that strategy. Through the Public Investment Fund and Savvy Games Group, Saudi Arabia has already invested heavily across the industry. Savvy owns mobile publisher Scopely, which it purchased for $4.9 billion, as well as ESL Faceit Group, one of the largest esports organizations in the world. Saudi Arabia's national gaming strategy aims to establish hundreds of gaming companies, create tens of thousands of jobs, and dramatically increase gaming's contribution to its economy by 2030. This is not merely a collection of development studios. EA owns some of the most valuable connections between gaming and traditional sport. EA Sports FC is connected to global football. Madden is tied to the NFL. NHL, UFC, and Formula One bring EA into several other enormous sporting markets. Saudi Arabia has simultaneously been investing heavily in football, boxing, Formula One, golf, and esports. Owning EA creates an obvious bridge between those different worlds. Imagine the potential cross-promotion between Saudi sporting events, esports tournaments, EA Sports competitions, and future entertainment projects. EA does not just sell games, it provides access to young audiences, sports fans, online communities, and digital economies across almost every major international market. Saudi Arabia is not spending $55 billion because it suddenly wants to make a new Command and Conquer. It is buying cultural reach. There is a genuinely optimistic interpretation of this takeover. Publicly traded gaming companies are under relentless pressure to demonstrate growth every financial quarter. It is not enough to remain profitable. Revenue must rise, engagement must increase, players must spend more, costs must come down. That pressure helps explain why so many large publishers have spent the last decade chasing live services, subscriptions, recurring revenue, and increasingly aggressive monetization. Taking EA private could theoretically allow it to escape some of that short-term thinking. Without a public share price reacting to every delay or disappointing sales forecast, EA might be able to give its studios more time. A private EA could potentially make long-term investments that would be difficult to defend to nervous public shareholders. Perhaps BioWare receives the resources and patience it needs to properly rebuild. Perhaps Respawn is allowed to experiment with every project needing to become a billion-dollar franchise. Perhaps EA becomes more willing to fund smaller games similar to It Takes Two, Unravel, or projects once released through EA Originals. The Public Investment Fund also has enormous financial resources and presents itself as a source of patient, long-term capital. Though this does not automatically mean that EA is about to run out of money or stop investing in games, there is a scenario where EA gains both financial stability and creative breathing room. Unfortunately, there is also a much less comforting scenario. This is a leveraged buyout. That means the acquisition is not simply being paid for with an enormous pile of Saudi cash. Approximately $20 billion of the transaction is reportedly being supported by debt. EA is expected to move from carrying a relatively manageable amount of debt to being responsible for an enormous financial burden. Changes the entire conversation. Someone eventually has to service that debt. Interest has to be paid. Investors expect returns. Costs must be controlled. The new owners may have taken EA away from the demands of the public stock market, but that does not mean the pressure to generate money disappears. It may simply become more concentrated. EA already has some of the most dependable revenue streams in gaming. Ultimate Team generates recurring spending through EA Sports, FC, and Madden. Apex Legends operates as a long-term live service. The Sims sells a seemingly endless collection of expansions and content packs. From an investor's perspective, those systems are not controversial gaming mechanics, they are predictable cash machines. And when a company takes on billions in acquisition debt, predictable cash machines become extremely valuable. So anyone expecting this takeover to make EA less focused on monetization should probably lower their expectations. The new EA may have less pressure to impress Wall Street every 3 months, but it could face even greater pressure to maximize the value of its biggest franchises. More live services, Ultimate Team, mobile expansion, licensing, more cost-cutting, and potentially fewer risky single-player games that take 6 years to develop and may never recover their budgets. The company is going private, but it is not becoming a charity. This is where the takeover becomes worrying for developers. EA has already spent years restructuring studios, cancelling projects and laying off employees. Now, place a giant leverage buyout on top of that. The fear is not necessarily that the new owners walk into BioWare on day one and start cancelling games personally. The more realistic danger is that EA receives strict financial targets and individual studios are judged almost entirely by their ability to help meet them. A franchise like EA Sports FC is clearly safe. Battlefield will remain a major priority because of its scale and commercial potential. But what about smaller teams? What about experimental games? What about studios that have just experienced a commercial disappointment? Private equity companies are not famous for their sentimental attachment to underperforming assets. If EA is expected to become leaner and more profitable, studios could be merged, reduced, or closed. Projects could be cancelled earlier. Development could be outsourced. Artificial intelligence and automation could be introduced as cost-saving measures. None of that is guaranteed, but the structure of the deal gives people legitimate reasons to be concerned. The question is not whether EA will still make games. Of course it will. The question is how many games will be allowed to exist without being obvious blockbuster products. Then we reach the most politically sensitive part of the acquisition. Saudi Arabia has faced sustained international criticism regarding human rights, political repression, freedom of expression, women's rights, and the treatment of LGBTQ people. Critics argue that its investments in football, esports, and entertainment are partly designed to improve the country's international reputation, a practice frequently described as sports washing, or in this case, games washing. It raises obvious concerns when the company being purchased owns something like The Sims. The Sims has built much of its identity around self-expression. It allows players to create different lives, relationships, identities, and families. Some creators and former developers have questioned whether that inclusivity could eventually clash with the values of EA's new controlling owner. Several prominent Sims creators have already distanced themselves from EA's creator program, although Maxis Studios has publicly said its values and creative control will remain unchanged. There is currently no evidence that Saudi officials are sitting inside EA rewriting storylines or removing characters, but ownership creates influence, even when that influence is indirect. Developers may begin anticipating what owners will approve. Executives may avoid ideas that could create political embarrassment. Creative restrictions do not always arrive as an explicit order. Sometimes they emerge gradually through budgets, approvals, and people quietly deciding that a particular idea is no longer worth fighting for. That is why players are watching this so closely. But is this good or bad for players? Honestly, we don't know yet. Anyone claiming this will unquestionably save EA is guessing. Anyone claiming every EA game will immediately become propaganda is also guessing. The most likely outcome is initially far less dramatic. EA Sports FC continues, Battlefield continues, The Sims continues. Andrew Wilson remains in charge. Most players notice almost no immediate difference. The real consequences will probably emerge over several years through investment decisions, studio closures, monetization strategies, and the types of games EA chooses to approve. Watch what happens after the first major commercial failure, whether EA begins investing in unusual single-player projects or retreats towards guaranteed franchises, whether BioWare is genuinely given time to recover, if The Sims maintains its creative identity, and most importantly, watch how EA handles its debt. That will tell us far more than any polished corporate statement about unlocking innovation and creating the future of entertainment. Saudi Arabia buying EA is not simply another rich investor purchasing a games company. It represents the direction in which the entire entertainment industry is moving. Games are no longer viewed merely as products. They are platforms, communities, sporting ecosystems, advertising networks, and sources of political influence. Saudi Arabia understands that. That is precisely why EA is worth $55 billion to it. The optimistic view is that EA will escape the quarterly obsession of the stock market and gain an owner capable of funding ambitious projects for decades. The pessimistic view is that EA will become a heavily indebted private company pushed to squeeze even more money from a smaller number of enormous franchises. Both outcomes are possible, but one thing is already clear: EA is not being bought because its new owners simply love video games. It is being bought because gaming has become one of the most powerful cultural industries on earth, and Saudi Arabia does not just want to participate in that industry, it wants to own a significant piece of it.